Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, amid a pandemic and months of civil unrest across the nation, can a divided country stomach a close, highly contested presidential election result? Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace weighs in on the 2020 race, the possibility of not having a winner declared on election night, and the controversy surrounding the Girl Scouts tweeting congratulations to Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett. And more Americans than ever before can vote by mail this year, but with a blizzard of legal challenges, deadline extensions, and conflicting rules, local election administrators are feeling the heat. Former federal prosecutor and Fox News contributor Andy McCarthy joins the rundown to break down some of the current election-related legal fights and what litigation we could see if key battleground states become too close to call. Plus commentary by Fox Nation host Tom Shalhoub. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Martha McCallum.
I'm Bill Hemmer.
I'm Shannon Bream, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Friday, October 30th, 2020. I'm Chris Foster. With just a few days left to go in the presidential campaign, Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace says about the polls and where we are now with Joe Biden looking like the favorite.
What's really remarkable is with all of these enormous events, COVID, economy, George Floyd, race protests, riots, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, this race has stayed remarkably stable.
I'm Lisa Brady. There have been a lot of court fights over the 2020 election already, and the U.S. Supreme Court is letting some of them linger until after Election Day.
I really think they're making a terrible mistake by not just doing their job now and upholding the state laws that apply in each of these states to set the election rules.
And I'm Tom Shalhoub. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
If the presidential race is a marathon, we're down to the last couple hundred yards. With 4 days left, President Trump has been crisscrossing the country, telling supporters,
"It took generations to build the America that we know and love. But if the radical left gained power, it would take them only a matter of months to burn it down, tear it down, or destroy it. I'm the only one standing between you and the left-wing mob. I hate to tell you, there aren't too many of us."
Joe Biden says America needs a change.
A president who is not in it for himself, but for others. A president who doesn't divide us, but unites us. A president who appeals not to the worst in us, but to the best. A president who cares less about his TV ratings and more about the American people. A president who looks not to settle scores, but to find solutions.
Record numbers of Americans have voted early, with more ballots still rolling in and huge turnout still expected on Election Day. Then maybe, that night, maybe, we know who the winner is.
I mean, I just think it would be good for the country because basically the only way that happens is that there's a decisive victory.
Chris Wallace is the host of Fox News Sunday.
Honestly, I think the country would benefit from not being a 50-50 country. I would hope both sides would feel that way. If there's a clear victory by Trump, the Democrats have to say, well, we lost, and let's mobilize for 2024. And conversely, if it's a clear victory for Biden. But, I think the worst thing, if it happens, we'll cover it and we'll live with it, would be a decision that's in dispute and we have to count every absentee or mail-in vote, and this thing goes on for weeks and it ends up in litigation. I don't think that helps anybody.
Yeah, we're going to have to wait and see how. Here's one nightmare scenario to look out for. There's a chance some ballots in Pennsylvania might not be counted. If they arrive after Election Day, they're going to be held separately in case there's a successful legal challenge. So it could come down to that.
Yeah, I frankly, if you're going to vote by mail and you haven't already put your ballot in the mailbox, you're a damn fool. Everybody has been alerted to the possibility of that, and why on earth? I voted weeks ago, and I just think it's obvious. So if at this point, don't vote mail-in. If you haven't voted so far, go vote early or vote on Election Day. But mail-in ballots now, and frankly, if you even did it a couple of days ago, it's a big mistake.
Yeah, even if it does go well, I wonder if this will be one of the things that sticks post-COVID. I used a Dropbox for the first time, It was at my convenience. I don't know why I'd ever go back. Maybe if it goes smoothly, maybe we'll all vote early from now on.
Yeah, I mean, I did exactly the same thing. I got a ballot in the mail. I checked it off. I went to an approved. Incidentally, Ian, let me just say something, and this is going to take a little political bias. I live in Washington, D.C. There are official mailboxes. There must be over a dozen all over the city in every neighborhood, one or so. And, very secure, very clearly marked. This thing in Texas where there is only one drop box in each county, and counties in Texas are damn big, and people have to drive for over an hour to get to one. I mean, that is just nonsense.
Well, I don't know why that's necessarily politically biased. There are Republicans who might not want to drive 2 hours or wait until Election Day either.
Well, because early mail-in, it just seems to have become a Democratic thing, and in-person voting seems to have become a Republican thing. And this seems to me to very much discourage early voting. I just don't understand why there's any legitimate reason in an entire county that there would only be one mail-in box. I know that it was approved and in the courts, and they've agreed to it. So it's not. I guess it was the Texas Supreme Judicial Court, but it really seems to me to be an effort to discourage voting.
Yeah. Look, if there is a big legal fight over this, I can't even imagine what comes out on the other side in terms of rancor or maybe even violence from supporters of whoever loses. And I really, like you, just hope it doesn't happen.
Yeah, we didn't have violence, or certainly not any measurable amount in 2000. We had plenty of rancor with the Bush v. Gore and what happened in Florida. And, that came down, think about that, how crazy it was. It came down to a single state and 537 votes. I even remember the margin for Bush over Gore in that state. You just got, and it's so much more polarized country 20 years later than we were back then. No, it's the last thing anybody should hope for is that this comes down to another Bush v. Gore and goes to the Supreme Court. And imagine, then you have Amy Coney Barrett, who's just been appointed and pushed through by a Republican Senate. Look, she's legitimate, and if it happens, but you talk about a thing that would only put an explosive flammable on the political polarization in this country. That would do it. You just hope there's a clear winner and a clear loser on election night. We have a peaceful transfer of power or no transfer because Trump wins, but just a clear decision by the country.
In 2000, you didn't have what is now the Supreme Court. What I'm trying to say is no longer seen as this august, grand, apolitical body, especially by liberals. There were complaints when the Girl Scouts congratulated Judge Barrett just as a woman making it to the court, and they had to delete it.
Yeah, and then actually, I think you're overstating how apolitical the court seemed then. It was 5-4. It went along party lines. The 5 Republican-appointed justices voted to end the recount and give the election to Bush. The 4 Democratic-appointed justices voted to keep the recount going, which would have allowed, although there's some other recounts say that it wouldn't have mattered anyway and that Bush still won. But, I mean, that was seen as quite political. And I think I talked to a couple of justices. They hated it. They hated being pushed into the middle. They felt that they had to do it. But, they realized how much it was politicizing the court and how much it damaged their image in the country as being, just applying the law, although they thought they had on both sides. I promise you, none of those 9 justices want to have to vote on who's going to be the next president.
In a more normal year, we might today be talking about the economic numbers or whatever you believe about Hunter Biden or the violence in Philadelphia. None of it seems to matter. I just can't imagine. It's all about turnout. There are no more minds left to make up.
No, that's right. I do, except that I do think COVID is still a huge issue, and I do think it's going to affect the vote, and probably not in President Trump's favor, because to the degree that you've got, we're seeing big spikes, and, I'm not saying that it's the president's fault, but I think to the degree that COVID is still out there and the impact it's having on the economy, and you see that there's been no COVID relief bill, and almost 800,000 people applied for for unemployment benefits none of that can be good news for the president. You know, he wants the news to be as positive as it could. And you know, if COVID cases were going down and the stock market were going up and unemployment were going down, those would all be good things. None of those are happening. So I got to say the fact set would not seem to me to be particularly favorable to the president. And if he wins, and look, there's a real chance he's going to win. I saw what happened in 2016. It'll be because of just people's devotion to him and trust in him and lack of trust in Joe Biden. I think if he wins, it'll be a very personal victory for Donald Trump because the issue set out there at the top of people's minds does not favor the president.
Yeah, I mean, you see polls before there are nominees, you know, the president versus generic Democrat. He's almost running against generic Democrat in this case. Nothing against Joe Biden, but you're right. It's about his personality.
Well, and frankly, and you know, I know a lot of people are complaining about the very leisurely campaign Biden is running. I think some of that is on purpose because I think to the degree possible, they have tried to make it not a choice. I mean, Trump wanted to make it a choice. Biden versus Trump. Biden wanted to make it a referendum. Trump versus Trump. And to the degree that he's been able to lower his profile, you know, maybe some of it is his age, some of it is caution about getting the coronavirus. I think some of it is very much wanting to have a low profile so people are judging Trump against him, you know, against a generic Democrat.
I mean, what was meant to be all along as an insult, the Sleepy Joe thing, may be in his favor. America may be ready for a little sleepy.
Oh, absolutely. And it's one of the cases he made. It's one of the cases he and Obama are making is just, aren't you tired of this? Don't you just want to return to normal? Now, a lot of people would answer no because they don't think normal as it affected them and the power elite telling them what to do, and liberals saying, you know, you can't do this form of energy and you can't eat this food and, you know, and you can't have this health insurance. They don't like that.
Again, in a normal year, I would ask you at this point to maybe look back at the campaign, compare it to others you've covered, but you've never covered one like this. No incumbent has ever had to deal with this kind of health crisis while running for re-election.
The only one that in terms of just all of the tumult would be 1968. We had the Vietnam War. We had Lyndon Johnson decide not to run for re-election as late as March of 68. You had two terrible assassinations of Martin Luther King and then Bobby Kennedy. But you know, the huge difference is obviously, you know, as bad as the Vietnam War was. I'm not taking an opinion on the war. I'm saying that, you know, as disruptive as it was, it's nothing compared to something in which, you know, I mean, it was over there, it wasn't here, and we've had 8 million Americans who have contracted the disease, and everybody knows somebody who's gotten it, and almost 250,000 people have died from it, and the huge economic dislocation. And then the other thing is this huge technological change, which is early voting, and you know, that's dramatically going to increase. But having said that, I'd make one last point. What's really remarkable is with all of these enormous events, COVID, economy, George Floyd, race protests, riots, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, this race has stayed remarkably stable. Biden has maintained a lead of about 7 to 10, 11 points throughout the entire race. And you know, that didn't happen in 68. That is really odd that things haven't changed, and it just seems people have locked in. And I don't think it's so much for Biden or for Trump. It's for Trump or against Trump. That's really what the divide is, and it has been throughout this entire year.
Well, Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace, I'll see you on the other side, unless we aren't on the other side.
And let's just hope the next time we talk, we know who the president is. That would be my fondest wish, that America will have made a decision, and we will know whether Donald Trump is going to serve another 4 years or Joe Biden is the new president-elect. I just want to see a result, and a decisive result, and and hope that we can all accept it.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
This is Tom Shalhoub with your Fox News commentary. Coming up.
President Trump spent months warning of possible fraud from a widespread expansion of mail-in voting during the pandemic.
Who's getting it? Who's sending it? Where is it going? Where is it coming back? Where is it coming from?
His tweets about it prompting warning labels and other penalties on social media. But at the same time, his campaign and other Republicans were busy in court, challenging voting rules in the name of election integrity, as states started tweaking rules to accommodate pandemic concerns. Democrats, including Joe Biden's running mate, Kamala Harris, accusing Republicans of trying to make it harder for people to vote.
They know when we vote, things change. They know when we vote, we win.
The results in court have been mixed in fights on issues ranging from signatures on absentee ballots to whether states could send ballots to eligible voters, whether they requested them or not. Deadlines have faced multiple challenges. This week, the U.S. Supreme Court blocked an effort in Wisconsin to let ballots received up to 6 days after the election be counted. But an extended deadline is being allowed in North Carolina. And they're letting an extension stand in Pennsylvania, but leaving open the possibility of reconsidering that after Election Day.
I think what's happening here is Chief Justice John Roberts is making what I would regard as a perilous bet.
Andy McCarthy is a former federal prosecutor and Fox News contributor.
And that is that the election will have a clear-cut winner, that the states that have election law disputes will turn out not to be important to the outcome, and therefore that the court will ultimately not have to intervene in Pennsylvania or North Carolina, which is the other state where the court issued a ruling Wednesday night. The reason I think it's a really perilous thing for the court to do is by not embracing the job that it has to do to straighten out what the rules are before the election. The court has now guaranteed that if it's called on to rule after the election, which is highly likely, the court will now be in a position of being perceived, not just deciding what the rules of the election are to be, but actually deciding who wins the presidency, which is a situation, I think, or a position that the court should not want to be in, that the country should not want the court in, and that really courts, pardon the pun, a catastrophe. So I really think they're making a terrible mistake by not just doing their job now and upholding the state laws that apply in each of these states to set the election rules.
What is the biggest chance for, I know it's a broad question, but what's the biggest chance for a messy situation here? Is it this issue of a ballot deadline, how long a state has to receive and count ballots after Election Day, or is it something like potential fraud from, expanded mail-in balloting?
Yeah, so Pennsylvania is the biggest threat. The other states, I'm talking about Wisconsin and North Carolina, although the court has already told Wisconsin they're not supposed to do this. Weirdly, even though they had just decided the Wisconsin case, they refused to do the same thing in the North Carolina case. But the idea of continuing the count for many days after the election, and in North Carolina, they're going to allow it to go on for 9 days after the election. That raises all kinds of problems because you have to continually monitor how the counting is done. But at least in those states, you can say that they have a rule that says the ballots have to be postmarked by Election Day. So in theory, no matter how long after the deadline they come in, if they're postmarked by Election Day, they count. And as long as that's monitored properly, it'll be messy if the election is close because, all eyes will be on that process. But if the election isn't close, or even if it is, you at least have a clear metric about what ballots count and what don't. They have to have a clear postmark or they won't count. What the judge is allowed to go on in Pennsylvania is very different. Not only has the judge allowed the ballots to be counted for 3 additional days after the election, he has judicially ordered that any ballot that either doesn't have a postmark or doesn't have a legible postmark is to be deemed as if it were submitted on or before Election Day, which means, in theory, what could happen is if the election is close, you'll get the results start to be announced on November 3rd. Everyone will know who won and by how much. And if you had people who were really insidious, what they could do is pull together enough unmarked, unpostmarked ballots for their own candidate to swing the election. In other words, you know how much you're down by. You get a bunch of ballots that aren't postmarked. You do them after the election day, and as long as you get them in by the 6th, you can swing the result. That I think is the real dangerous problem.
Well, in terms of monitoring the process, the president and his campaign have talked about poll watchers. What's legal and what's not where that's concerned?
The truth of the matter is, elections are really conducted under state law, and there's not a lot that the federal courts can do about them. There's not a lot that the federal authorities can do about them. So you let people know that you're out there, and if there's anything actionable on a federal level, you'll be all over it. But the fact of the matter is, it's really a state law thing, and the rules are different in every state, including the rules about who can be at the polling stations and who can be monitoring.
What about these record-shattering, hours-long lines for early voting? I mean, if on Election Day we still have really long lines, what happens when the polls close and there's still a long line? Are those rules the same everywhere? Does everyone get to vote?
Yeah, well, what traditionally happens, and I guess we can say traditionally because we've had a few elections in recent years where this situation has come up now and again, is people will go to court and judges will issue orders saying that the polling place has to remain open for X amount of time. And then you have a big dispute over, A, does the court have the authority to do that when the state legislature has set the date for elections? And B, if the court does have the authority to do that, what does the time extension mean? And what I mean by that is, let's say you extend the time from 9 to 11 o'clock at night, right, to give an extra 2 hours. Does that mean everybody has to be online by 9 o'clock and the balloting ends at 11? Or does it mean that everybody who's online up until 11 has to be allowed to vote? So all these practical problems end up coming up. And what happens, and I think what will happen here, is there'll be an effort to segregate the ballots that are cast under any special provisions that are made to react to the long lines. And then those ballots will be kept separately from the other ballots, and there'll be litigation about whether they get counted or not, because these are the kind of things that can't be decided right there and then the night of the election. But when you get to court and the challenges happen in the days after the election, what they'll have to sort out is, did the court have the authority to do it, and which ballots should count and which ones won't? But it could be a mess.
Well, and depending on how close it is, those types of things could add up to enough ballots to swing it. The ballots that were cast after polls were supposed to close, the ballots that are the subject of ongoing fights about how many days states can count ballots. So you could see the various types of litigation that that could go on. If Joe Biden, though, let's say hypothetically, he's declared the winner, the Trump campaign doesn't accept that, what would the legal options for Biden be at that point, or would it be a moot point once and if Congress certifies the results?
I think it needs to be stressed that it's not up to a candidate to accept the results of the election. The framers, who were very smart, sophisticated people, would never have left it up to the people who are in office to decide whether they stay in office. Our whole system is based on balances of power and divisions of authority, and the idea that you can never leave too much power in any one set of hands. And one thing you can never do is leave it up to the person who's an incumbent official whether they get to keep their job or not. So whether the president accepts the result or not, whether Biden accepts the result or not, there's going to be an election. There may be some disputes about the result of the election, but they will be sorted out at the state levels. And eventually the states, and this will have to happen by December 14th by federal statute, the states will sort out which candidate won that state's electoral votes. The reason they'll have to do it by December 14th is they will run the risk of forfeiting the state's votes if they don't do that. So they have a great incentive to decide it. So whatever disputes there'll be will be worked out. The states will choose electors no later than December 14th. It's really supposed to be December 8th, but in the law, there's no enforcement mechanism to force them to do it by December 8th as long as they do it by December 14th. The votes then go to the U.S. Congress, and by statute, on January 6th at 1 p.m., they count the votes. So whether the candidates accept the result or not really doesn't make any difference.
One follow-up question, though, on this December 14th deadline. Do the courts abide by that? I mean, if there are outstanding cases that still haven't been decided, they're still duking it out in court, will the courts be like, well, you know what, we're out of time because it's time for everything to be finalized for December 14th?
True, but this is the beauty of having a federal system where the elections, we don't have a national election, right? We have 50 state elections. So you could have a dysfunctional state that can't decide. But the thing is, Congress is entitled to set the deadlines for the states to comply. And the risk that they run if they don't comply is that they forfeit their votes. So I don't see that happening. I do see a lot of ways that this could be messy, but I don't think that's going to end up being one of them.
Former federal prosecutor and Fox News contributor Andy McCarthy, thanks a lot for your time.
It's my pleasure.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network. In these ever-changing times, you can rely on Fox News for hourly updates for the very latest news and information on your time. Listen and download now at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
And now, some good news with Tanya J. Powers.
As early voting continues across the country, Americans are turning out by the millions to cast their ballots. Some are waiting for hours to do it. Here in New York City, voters have finally gotten the chance to vote early, with this being the first presidential election with that option. Madison Square Garden is the home of the New York Knicks and venue for countless major concerts, neither of which is happening right now due to COVID-19. But that doesn't mean there aren't people lining up to get in. This year, the Garden is an early voting polling site where hundreds have been standing in long lines to cast ballots. Last weekend, on the first day of early voting, I put on my mask and I went to ask voters how they felt about it, particularly the waiting part. Some told me that it had taken an hour and a half or more to make it to the front door, but they were ready.
And I prepared my schedule to make sure I could wait.
So you blocked out some time?
Oh yeah. Yeah, brought a book, sandwich.
So why was it important for you to get out here today on first day of early voting?
We just know what we want. There was pretty much no doubt once we got the polling information. We're like, no, we'll take care of it. I mean, this is we were talking about it on the way in. Was just I think it's important that a lot of effort has been done to get voter turnout higher, and I know that there is this certain attitude of certain people think it's futile to vote, certain people wonder if it counts, and I think there's only there is the first thing, which is you don't know until you try. But there's the other thing where, even if you're pretty sure where your state is going to go, the amount of turnout is also important.
To show solidarity. Right,
yeah, it shows that do efforts do mean things to people, and that we are listening, and we have something we can do.
And so, New Yorkers won't be stopped, baby.
Do you normally get this excited about voting?
No, not at all.
Some people made it a festive affair with singing. I wound my way around the long lines, and I wanted to talk to the last person who walked up at the same time I did. His name was Harvey. What motivated you to come out today on the first day?
My friend from Brooklyn, she hasn't. She's the first
she's a voter that doesn't vote very often. So, but in this election, you got to vote. Otherwise, you can't complain. You can't complain anyhow. It doesn't help.
What was the first president you voted for?
The first president I voted for, just a minute. Let's see. It was could be Eisenhower, I think. But I didn't vote for Eisenhower.
That was the first
at least whoever ran on the Democratic ticket.
Harvey told me he's 86. Have you lived here all your life?
Yes.
Yeah?
I'm a provincial New Yorker, and you say, what does that mean? That means everything west of the Hudson is Utah.
And in a time of division in our country, the good news is we can all do the same thing. Vote. In New York City, Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Tom Shalhoub.
What's on your mind?
I'm hearing a lot of talk from public health officials who seem to want to make the holidays less fun this year. But Halloween? Come on, Halloween's got to be all right. So I went to the CDC website, and of course it says protect yourself from COVID-19 this Halloween. And it has activities listed in 3 different categories: low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. And it says you should avoid the high risk category. Let's take a look at these categories. Low risk, okay? A whole list of things that nobody would want to do, including virtual Halloween costume contests. You know, I'm done with the virtual. No more Zooms, okay? Here we go. Moderate risk. Go to an apple orchard where people use hand sanitizer before touching the apples. Who writes these things? I mean, is it a brainstorming session? Here's another moderate risk activity. It says, go on a one-way walk through a scary forest with a mask on. It sounds like a blast. Okay, what's in the high risk here? It says, avoid these activities. Number 1 on the list, trick-or-treating. Oh. Trick-or-treating. Look, it's outdoors, it's young people, the lowest risk category, and everybody's wearing masks. Guess it's not safe. The kids should just stay home. I mean, what's childhood anyway? It's just a temporary condition. Young people these days, they have so much danger in their world. People of my generation, you know, the only thing we had to worry about when I was a kid on Halloween was somebody putting a deadly object inside an apple.
I'm Tom Shalhoub.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. Did you hear the news? Now you can. With instant updates from Fox News for Amazon Alexa. Just say,
Alexa, play news from Fox.
In Fox News.
It's the latest when you need it, on demand, from Fox News and Amazon Alexa.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.